I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was early morning, the sun had barely come up, and I was standing at the edge of my father's farm, staring at a locked metal gate that had never been there before, and right behind it a bright new sign read, "Private road no access without HOA approval." My hands clenched so tight I could feel my pulse in my fingers because that road was not just dirt and gravel. That road was the only way to reach my dad, who was inside that farmhouse alone, and sick, and suddenly blocked off like he didn't exist. And that was the moment I realized this was not just a misunderstanding, this was war. And if you think that sounds crazy, wait until you hear what they did next, and trust me, you are going to want to stay till the end, because this one turns in a way you will not see coming. And before we go further, if you enjoy stories where power gets flipped and people get what they deserve, make sure you hit like and subscribe to Karen's Stories daily, because this one is just getting started. I had been driving that road my whole life. It cut straight through what used to be open land, fields, and woods that my father worked on for decades before developers came in and turned everything around. It into a polished neighborhood with fences and rules and people who smiled too much and complained even more. They called it a community. I called it a bubble, and my father never cared for it. He kept to himself, stayed on his land, and never caused a problem. But the problem came to him anyway. A few months before that morning, the HOA had started sending letters, first polite, then demanding, then threatening. They claimed the road that led to my father's property was now under their jurisdiction. Because it crossed land that had been rezoned when the neighborhood was built, they wanted permits, fees, compliance inspections, things that made no sense for a man who had been there long before they ever existed. My father ignored them. He was old. School, he believed, if you left people alone, they would leave you alone, but people like that HOA president do not think that way. Her name was Linda, and she walked around like she owned everything in sight, always dressed perfect, always talking down to people like she was doing them a favor by letting them breathe. I had seen her once or twice before, always polite, always distant, but something about her smile felt fake, like she was already planning something behind it. Then one day, the letters stopped and the gate appeared overnight just like that. No warning, no discussion, just a barrier between me and my father. And when I tried to open it, I realized it was locked. Heavy steel, brand new and built to stay that way. I called my dad, right away. His voice sounded tired, weaker than usual, and when I told him what I was looking at, there was a long silence before he said, "I figured they would try something like this." That hit me harder than I expected, because it meant he had been dealing with this alone without telling me, trying to protect me from the stress while he handled it his way, but his way was not going to work anymore. Not this time. I drove straight to the HOA office that morning and walked in without knocking. The place smelled like fresh paint and fake flowers, and sitting behind the desk was Linda, looking exactly as calm as ever, like she had been expecting me. I told her who I was and why I was there, and she just leaned back in her chair like she was about to explain something simple to a child. She said the road was now private property controlled by the HOA, and access required approval and compliance with community standards. I asked her what standards applied to a farm that existed before her neighborhood was even planned, and she smiled that same fake smile and said, "Times change and people have to adapt." That was the moment I knew talking was not going to fix anything. She did not want a solution. She wanted control, and blocking that road was her way of showing it. I left without arguing, because I needed to think clearly. Anger would not help. My dad needed access, and I needed to figure out how to get it back legally and permanently, because if I forced that gate open, they would use it against me, and I was not about to give them that advantage. Over the next few days, I started digging into everything. Property records, maps, old documents, anything that could tell me exactly who owned that road and what rights came with it. And what I found changed everything, because that road was never fully transferred to the HOA. It was an easement, a legal right of access that could not be blocked without due process, and they had skipped all of it. No notice, no court approval, nothing. They had just acted like they owned it. That was their mistake, but I did not move right away. I waited, I watched, I gathered everything I needed, because when you deal with people who abuse power, you do not just fight back. You make sure when you do, they cannot recover. Meanwhile, my father was stuck relying on deliveries and neighbors who were willing to help. But even that started getting complicated, because the HOA began warning residents about trespassing and liability. Suddenly, people were afraid to even drive near. That road, Linda had managed to turn a simple access route into a controlled choke point, and she was enjoying it. Every time I drove up to that gate and saw it locked, I felt that same anger building, but I kept it under control because I knew the longer I waited, the stronger my position became, and when the time came, I was not just going to open that road, I was going to make sure they never tried something like this again. One evening, I sat with my dad on the phone longer than usual. He sounded tired but calm, and he told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Son, do not rush. This people like that rely on you reacting too fast. Make them regret it the right way." And I promised him I would. So I made a plan, not just to get access back, but to reclaim the entire road in a way that left no room for them to interfere again. And the moment that plan started moving, everything changed faster than even I expected. Because what Linda and her HOA did not realize was that they had not just blocked a road, they had triggered something much bigger, and once it started, there was no stopping it, and by the time they understood what was happening, it was already too late. I did not rush into it the next morning or the next week. I let them think they had won. I let that gate sit there like it belonged to them while I finished everything quietly behind the scenes, because when I moved, I wanted it to be final. No arguments, no confusion, just facts that could not be ignored, and the day I chose to act started like any other, except this time I was not alone. I pulled up to that same gate, but behind me were two surveyors, a legal officer and a county inspector, all of them carrying documents that proved exactly what I had found, that road was never theirs to block, and what they did was not just wrong, it was illegal. The moment we stepped out, you could feel the shift. Even the neighbors started coming out watching from a distance because something about the scene was different. This was no longer one man arguing. This was authority showing up with proof. Linda arrived fast, like she had been waiting for another confrontation. But this time, her confidence did not last long. The inspector explained everything clearly. The easement, the violation, the unlawful obstruction, and the penalties that came with it. Her face changed right there in front of everyone. That same woman who spoke like she owned everything suddenly had nothing to say. They ordered the gate removed immediately, and not just unlocked, but taken down completely and documented as evidence of obstruction. And when the workers started cutting through the locks and lifting that metal barrier away, I stood there watching, knowing this was only the beginning, because reclaiming the road was one thing, making sure they never touched it again was another. The legal officer handed Linda a notice right in front of the crowd outlining fines, potential lawsuits, and liability for blocking emergency access to an occupied property. And that was the moment the reality hit her. This was not a small HOA issue anymore. This was something that could follow her for years. Within hours, the gate was gone, the sign was gone, and the road was open again, just like it always should have been, but now there was something new, official markers placed along the path confirming the legal right of access, protected and recorded in a way that could not be twisted or claimed again. I drove straight through without stopping for the first time since this started, and when I reached my father's house, he was standing outside waiting like he already knew, and for a moment neither of us said anything. We just looked at each other, and that silence said more than any words could. The story did not end there, because once everything became public, more people started speaking up. Neighbors who had been fined, threatened, controlled by the same HOA started sharing their own experiences, and suddenly Linda was not dealing with just me anymore. She was facing a growing list of complaints, investigations, and pressure from every direction. Within weeks, the HOA was forced to step back, policies were reviewed, leadership was questioned, and the same control they once used against others turned into accountability that they could not escape. As for me, I kept things simple. I made sure the road stayed open, I checked in on my dad more often, and I let the results speak for themselves, because sometimes the strongest response is not loud, it is lasting. If you made it this far, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in that situation, and share this story with someone who believes in standing up the right way, because sometimes the best way to win is to make sure they never get the chance to try again.